You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where we're going back to T20 land on this episode. We've got England v Pakistan, we've got India v Australia, and we have South Africa T20. South Africa 20, SA 20, something like that. I'm Jack Hope. I'm joined by Dan Weston. I'm sure he knows the name of the competition. How are you doing, Dan?
Yeah, I'm good, Jack. Yeah, all good, mate. I think it's the SA20, but yeah, wouldn't want to be quoted on that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the SA20. We're going to run through things in the England v Pakistan, India v Australia, SA20 questions order. Today, but before we get into things, just a couple of messages. We are on Patreon, patreon.com/the Cricket Pod. We have a Twitter @the Cricket Pod. And if you're watching on YouTube or wherever, listening somewhere else, hit like and subscribe. Help us grow our audience. It's like the best thing you can do short of becoming a Patreon. Just a reminder as well, for people who didn't catch it, we spoke with Cheteshwar Pujara on our last episode, so we want as many people to go back and listen to that as possible. 25-minute chat with him about his time at Sussex, what he thinks about the game, how he's changed from being a stodgy red ball player to flowering into this beautiful white ball destroyer, and of course some of his top moments with India. Dad, let's kick off with England v Pakistan. In their first of 7 T20s. They're playing half an IPL against each other over the next 2 weeks, which is pretty nuts. Yesterday, Pakistan batted first, got off to a rapid start, and then remembered they're Pakistan and slowed down to end up with a very on-brand 158. In response, England got ahead of the game early and knocked off the runs with without a lot of flair. It wasn't particularly sexy innings. Alex Hales, returning to the squad after being a very naughty boy, notched a 50, and Harry Brook showed off with 42 from 25 rocks. Dan, England v Pakistan, what do you make of the two teams lining up as a whole across the series? Like what's the preview? What was your preview for things post first match?
Okay, so first of all, I think that Pakistan are kind of more predictable in terms of their output than England are. Although saying that at 85 for 1 off 57 balls, any kind of run predictor would have had them a lot higher than 158. I think it's fair to say. But I do think that they're quite predictable in terms of they've got the openers who will always, or the vast majority of the time, get them off to a decent platform. And then they've got a middle order which is shaky at best, I think would be fair to say. Despite half decent cameo from Iftikhar Ahmed, I don't really rate him at all. I'm not a massive fan of Krishtil Shah. Shan Masood is at 4 is a classic case of picking the best player available rather than the player who's most suited to play the task in hand. And their bowling attack is high variance. I think that's fair to say. But we know all this in advance. They've got three pacers who can hit well in excess of 140. And sometimes you roll teams over for not a lot when you do that, and sometimes you get smashed. And I think Naseem Shah kind of set the tone for that a little bit in the first over. Going back to what you were saying about the sort of the half IPL Jack as well, it's quite interesting because my wife's into cricket now these days. She loves cricket. She does T20 and 100 in particular. And I said to her, England are playing today, this afternoon against Pakistan. She goes, well, what's it for? And I was like, oh, it's like a seven match T20 series. And she goes, well, we're not interested in that. What's the point of that? What do you win? What do you win at the end of the day for that? And it's kind of true. Like, if you're devoting so much time to something, you probably want a bit more of a outcome.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this, isn't it? So they're playing 7 because England refused to tour last year at the last minute, and so they bolted 2 extra on to a 5-match series this year. A T20 series, in my opinion, should never be more than 3, and even then, that sometimes feels like too much. What I don't really get from an England perspective is they're playing 10 matches. 10 warm-up matches for a T20 group stage, which lasts 5 matches. Surely that should be, like the other way around. I was arguing with Knackle, who sometimes is on the show on Twitter yesterday about this. And he was saying he prefers the World Cup being short and sharp. And I was like, well, is it, what are we actually getting out of the World Cup? Do teams turn up, they don't know what they're doing? There's loads of variance. It isn't aligned to any of the other major tournaments on the T20 circuit, in that they play so few games. And then we get left with these extended bilateral that kind of make up the shortfall from an international point of view. And as you say, like, they aren't, narratively speaking, once you get over the fact that England are back in Pakistan for the first time in 17 years, which is a huge event, it was like something well worth tuning in for, packed house. I'll be excited for the next match. I might even be excited for the one where they change cities. But like, I think England, almost from the team they picked, have shown that they're not actually that bothered about whether they win the 7-match series. So, yeah, I'm sort of with your wife on this one. I think is what I'm saying, Dan.
Yeah, I'd like to see a World Cup where there's as little variance as possible. We do see the best team genuinely win the tournament, which isn't always the case, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Have 10 teams in it. Everyone plays 9 matches. Then you have first the winner of second v third or something like that. Make it do something like that. I don't know.
Like top 4, or the knockouts, like the IPL kind of style. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Pakistan? We get a lot of grief on this podcast, Dan, for not talking about Pakistan enough. So we're going to talk about their batting, I think, today. Is there a game you can remember where they didn't score? I'm talking the history of cricket, between 145 and 165. Or have I just imagined that?
I'm sure
every match. What's going on? Like, what is it that they're actually trying to achieve? And are they missing something? Are they missing players that they could be playing that could make them a bit more dynamic, or is this just a limitation of their player pool?
Personally, I think that I would play Azam Khan in their group. I think he offers something different as a left-handed spin hitter. I don't like the structure of their top 7 in terms of, after the openers, you've got to say Masood seems a bit shoehorned in at 4, a bit like Zaman was at 3 to some degree before he got injured. So I'm not a massive fan of Iftikhar. Mohammad Nawaz is now at 6, and he's the only bowling option in that top 6, with the kind of a luxury player at 7 in Kustil Shah. Just makes kind of no sense really at all. So they lack bowling options. A genuine top 6 batter who can bowl as well, I think, is something that they do lack. And then they've got the world's longest tail at like 8 to 11. So and that ultimately perhaps is a contributory factor to how that innings played out yesterday a little bit, in that there's this like fear that once they get like 5 down, they're in deep trouble. And that maybe they need to look at upskilling their batters a little, or bowlers a little bit, I should say, to be better batters or find players. So someone like, they seem to be, how do I say, very, very driven towards finding pace bowlers, out and out pace bowlers. But actually, is that necessarily a good thing in T20 cricket? I'm not so sure. Certainly not when they're all the same type of same speeds. There's no variation really in terms of their speeds. And then you've got players like Fahim Ashraf and Hassan Ali who perhaps aren't as quick as those guys who are playing, but they do offer a lot more with the bat, and you can bat down a lot deeper with those players in the team. Also, if you put in Shadab Khan, obviously, for Usman Khadir, then that helps as well in that situation too. But it wouldn't be difficult to have a little bit of an overhaul of that team and have a team where you bat down to 9, for example.
Yeah, and then at least some of the anchor guys can maybe try and put their foot down with a little less fear. I think Asif Ali being out of the 11 injured as well is a little bit of a loss for them, as maybe the only sort of middle order or lower middle order hitter that they have that would stand up against other international competition. I actually had to look through all players in the PSL at the death at who struck at over 150, and there are only 4 Pakistani names in the list.
Hmm.
2 of them are 40 and 41, Malik and Hafiz. Krishtil Shah is one of them. He's the best. I don't think his average is great. And Imad Wasim, who averages 13 at 150, which isn't awesome. Let's be honest.
And this has been ultimately, Jack. It's been a long-term problem with the Pakistan player pool. And it's something that I remember writing some of my really early articles about back in the day. Is that when you have a dynamic like that in your domestic league, it really is no surprise when the franchises all pick overseas batters to play for them and pick local bowlers primarily. That it just makes complete sense. And anyone who doesn't understand that's probably a bit of an idiot.
Yeah, I mean the other names on the list are like David Visa and Tim David, etc.
Yeah.
It's circuit guys who have got the long handle in their kit bag. From an England perspective, Hales coming back into the side and then coming back into the squad and then going straight into the 11 was an interesting call from England. I think. What did Ben Stokes say before when he was asked about Hales coming back into the squad? It was, we've both got the same objective to win World Cups. Do you think Hales adds something to England, or is this a sticking plaster while Butler is unavailable?
Interesting question. Personally, I rate Hales above Phil Salt, so you can make. I would think you can make the case for Butler to come in for Salt ultimately when he's fully fit. Obviously, then he'll take the gloves as well, and that's absolutely fine. For me, I think Alex Hales is a considerable upgrade on the majority of other players who have been tested out for these kind of roles. He for me has always been a better T20 player than Jason Roy. Roy is probably, I think, more suited to the 50 over format, and for me, I think it's actually a nice upgrade, and it's if you're just talking purely on an ability perspective, which I think is the only way we can discuss a 53 or 40 yesterday and a brilliant match-winning innings. Ultimately, in what looked kind of, even though it wasn't a big chase, it looked fairly tricky, and you can see England falling flat on their faces in those type of chases quite a lot. Match-winning chase, and yeah, I think that you can't argue with his track record in T20 cricket. And also the fact that he's got a very good track record in Australia as well is worth mentioning too. Given the fact that he got World Cup there.
I thought he looked pretty good. I mean, he was dropped hilariously at one point, but that's the stereotype of Pakistani fielding, isn't it? Coming to bear. Batting wise, the other guy who looked really good was Harry Brook. I thought he struggled slightly against India in the summer when he played in some of those white ball matches, particularly when he came up against top quality spinners. But he looked comfortable in Pakistan for his 42 from 25. I always go back. Well, I always mention that Faf du Plessis said Brook reminded him of AB de Villiers. Do you see any comparison there, Dan?
Yeah, actually, not necessarily stylistically, which I guess is what Faf was referring to, but from a statistical basis, where AB de Villiers was one of those few players who could average over 20 balls per dismissal and over 20% boundary percentage, and you can definitely see Brook having a similar dynamic to that as well. So, yeah, any player that can do that should be applauded because there's not many of them around the world. Now, on the subject of spin, I think that there's probably a slight vulnerability for him still against spin turning away from him early in his innings, I should say. And I think he's going to have tougher tests against better spinners in the World Cup. But by the same token, it was really, really pleasing to see him come in and continue his progression in international cricket for sure.
And bowling-wise, I was really interested in seeing Luke Wood at the international level, and I thought he was the most impressive of England's bowlers. I think some of them are quite known quantities. I'm not really sure what England hoped to discover to some extent from some of the players in this team. But Luke Wood was actually a selection I thought that could really be one for the future, and he He was excellent, I'd say. I know you were impressed with him at the 100 as well, Dan.
Yeah.
One to watch out for, right?
Yeah, I think we chatted about that over the summer, didn't we? But I mean, for me, Luke Wood is a really good example, actually, of players who've never been given those opportunities, who have actually done pretty well over the last couple of years, and this sort of tired selection policy that England have had has cost them opportunities over the last year or two. So in the T10, me and Kunal, who's the Trent Rockets and Knots analyst, we were doing the recruitment at Bangla, and we bought Luke Wood in, and that was his first overseas tournament, and he did really, really well for us. And obviously then he's gone to PSL, played for Keto, I think it was, and then has done well in the summer in England as well. Now against Phoenix, even though we won the game, his 4 overs were, by some distance, in my opinion, the highest quality 4 overs that I've seen from an opposition bowler in any Phoenix match, and probably I will go as far as to say any 4 over spell that I've seen from any bowler in the 102 years, and I've watched 90% of the matches.
That's pretty high praise.
Very much so. I think if he could work on his batting a bit, he would be you could look at him and say, okay, well, we don't really need David Wood now.
Yeah, no, I can see that happening sort of anyway. Just it's very difficult to one international match to say this, but I saw a lot of the 100 as well, and I thought Wood was probably the bowler of the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, anyway.
Looking domestically, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. Selection-wise, I heard some really interesting, let's call them rumours, about how players have been selected. Apparently, there was a spell where Ed Smith expected. I don't know. I haven't heard this from the source. This is hearsay. There was a spell where Ed Smith was fielding calls from players who thought they should be selected, and that was, in essence, how to get the attention of the England selection committee. The job is up for grabs at the moment. What do you make of that as a model for selection that you have to ring up like it's a club cricket team on a Tuesday night?
Like an appeal process or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, obviously it's not for me. I'd like to think that. I mean, obviously I don't know if this is true or not, so we can't go too far into this. But I would like to think that if I was doing the job, I would do it with a lot of due diligence, and I would have all sorts of run production models and expected probability distributions for performances and all sorts of stuff that wouldn't be relying on an appeal on the phone by somebody. That's for sure. Well, saying that, I do get quite a lot of messages going, pick me in auctions and stuff like that. But you have to kind of stay true
Neutral.
to the process. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.